Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
So, compañeros, welcome to episode 98. And wow, 98 already, Steve.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, it's 48 that I've been part of. So it's coming up on 50 for me, or episode 100 for the entire podcast. So that's exciting.
That's right. We're coming up very, very quickly. In fact, we're going to have another call to action. So after you listen to this one, we're going to release another little bonus episode here asking for your input for episode number 100. So, if you listen to that one first, that's fine. But we're soliciting feedback for episode 100. We have something different we want to try there.
Yep. So when people get to that, keep in mind that this is episode 98. And we've only got about a week and a half to get episode 100 done based off of our time that we take to put it together. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
So for this episode, we took a different tack. This was, you may recall that I was up in Baltimore a couple of weeks ago for the SQL Saturday. And I love to do episodes at SQL Saturdays. We're more the merrier kind of folks. And so I walked into the speaker's room and I said, what is the first thing that you change after you install SQL Server? And so that's our topic today.
Yeah, what a great question, because I think there's so many different things you could do.
Sure.
Yeah.
And a variety of different reasons. And I think many of them that you'll hear are kind of tried and true, but there are some different takes that we'll get into as well.
Yep.
But first, let's do a little compañero shout out.
Okay. The first one I was at a local SQL Server users group meeting, and one of the members there said that he loved the episode on DBA tools that we did a few weeks ago, and that was episode 91.
Yes, and we love that episode as well. And Christy and her team, thanks again for coming on the program. I guess I should go ahead and say that I have finally been able to get in and start using DBA tools, and I feel like my life will be changed forever.
Wow, lives with the podcast, even if it's ours. So
yes, that's right. Yes, I can assure you, compañeros, as much as I love you and enjoy hanging out with you and meeting you, I can assure you that I'm getting much more value out of the podcast than many of you. Our other shout out is to Douglas Kemp.
Yes, he said on LinkedIn, on a message he sent me, he said, I listen to the podcast every week and I force it to the top of my playlist every time. So that's kind of good feedback there. Thanks, Douglas.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Okay, so you may know that Steve and I were putting together a conference in October. It'll be in Norfolk, Virginia. So especially for you, East Coasters, we're looking for a way to engage with you in a real-time way. And so we put together this conference. And so now we want to share 5 compelling reasons that we think you may want to consider coming to the conference.
Yeah.
So number 1.
And this really means that the talk quality is much higher and the event is going to be curated.
Right.
So what do we really mean by that, Carlos?
So what we mean is that we've been asking for feedback. I've been reaching out to managers and to listeners alike. What is it that you want to talk about? And then that feedback goes directly to the speakers. And the speakers that we've asked to come, because in reality, they're doing us a huge favor, giving us their time and willing to commit to the whole conference. It's a big ask, but they're willing to make that commitment. And they're also willing to make that commitment to you, the attendee. And so as you provide feedback or you're like, hey, I want to make sure this thing gets covered, that feedback is going to go right back to the speakers. They're going to know about it. They're going to be around to be able to answer those questions. And we know that these folks are going to be the type of folks that are going to be willing to just strike up a conversation with you and talk it up.
Very good. So what's our second reason to consider the Compañero Conference?
So we're capping attendees. So we're going to cap it right around 50 to 60. So this is almost going to be like a training class, but with the organization of a conference. There will be different speakers, but we're going to have the benefit of being able to stretch the sessions if we need to, or limit others as we need to. It gives us the flexibility to change things, and of course, then do things like the cruise that evening of the 3rd, or of the 4th, rather.
The other thing that's nice with that many attendees is that you get to know people. And rather than leaving a session and walking out into a sea of strange faces, you'll see the same people over the conference and you get to know them a little bit better.
Exactly. And the other thing that we're hoping there is that you'll find folks in similar situations, right? Either using the same applications, right? Maybe they have a boss that's similar, and you'll be able to either, compare notes or commiserate together.
And And the third reason is that the speakers aren't put on a pedestal. Sure, we might be up on stage,
right,
or behind a podium, and sure, we'll have MVPs there, but they won't make you feel silly asking questions. And they want to have a conversation. And this is a special list of speakers here. It's wasn't really open to the public. This was more, well, I guess it was open for consideration, but everyone on the list that's a speaker were people that we individually chose to be part of this special environment. And
that's right.
I think that you'll get to know the speakers. And oftentimes you'll go to a conference, you'll see the speaker in your session or their session, and you may never see them again. Where here, they'll be in all the other sessions. So if you have a question that comes up and says, hey, how does this relate to the session you gave earlier in the day? Those other speakers will be able to jump in and help out.
Exactly. And the number of different perspectives that will come along with that. All of these folks have been, they remember what it's like to be in the beginning, and they're willing to give back to the community. And so we think that we created a great speaker lineup here.
And the fourth compelling reason?
So the talks are actionable, right? So one of the pieces of feedback that we got back is, while we want to give highlights and overviews, so our conference isn't going to be focused so much on new features, meaning, all the 2016 stuff. I'm sure it will get brought up and we'll talk about it. None of the talks are focused on those new features. We want to go back to, even 2008, include, scenarios like that, and then have you be able to walk away with an action item. Here's something that I can take and begin implementing in my environment right away.
Yeah, that's great, because I know sometimes it's frustrating when you go to on the vNext version of SQL Server.
Right.
And you're going to have to wait a while till that's out, and then you have to wait even longer until it's adopted in your environment. So everything we do here should be actionable, and everyone will take away something they can use.
And then to tag along with that is, we're going to leave a portion of the conference for some hands-on learning. So we'll have a couple of different items that you can participate in to actually go through, Azure being one of them, right? So setting up an Azure SQL database, and kind of just going through some of those steps and talking through what that means. But you'll also have the opportunity to circle back and ask folks, or whoever you've met, however that ends up working out, hey, I have this question. Could you show me how to do this, or what this means? And so we'll have that time to open up our laptops, right? Get a buddy, go through a group exercise, whatever that looks like, and you'll be that much further along as a result.
Yep. And the fifth compelling reason to consider the Compañero conference.
Yeah, perhaps the most compelling is that it's going to be introvert friendly. Again, the way that we've set it up with limiting attendees and speakers that we've selected is that you won't have to ask your question on a microphone with 100 other people kind of judging you, or whatever thoughts you might be having there. You're going to have opportunities to interact with others. It won't be wild and crazy. Yes, we're going to go on the cruise. There'll be music. If those who want to dance, they'll be able to. But you can also go up to the top in the breeze, relax, have a drink, and just talk with other folks, get to know them, whether that be about SQL Server or whatever else,
So with this, hopefully everyone can see we're trying to make this different than a lot of the other conferences out there. And I think that those things that we're doing to make it different, they'll make it more interesting for a lot of people.
Yep. And so we hope to see you there. Again, from a timing perspective, the current price is $400, and that will increase on June 16th to $500. So if that's price sensitive there, we do have the block of rooms. All that information is available at compañeroconference.com. And we hope to see you down in Norfolk.
So the URL for this podcast episode is SQLDataPartners.com/firstthing or /98 for the episode number.
That's right. And I have an omission that I need to make everybody aware of, and I apologize. So as I mentioned, we were there in Baltimore. We started, but I thought we had started recording, and I missed a couple of the first speakers. And so I apologize. It didn't hit the record button quite soon enough. And so we missed a couple, and I think they're worth mentioning. And so we'll go through those here quickly.
Yep. So the first one you mentioned, I think, was Kevin Feasel.
Yes.
And one of the first things that he does, and I think was Kevin Feasel.
Yes.
And one of the first things that he does is he changes the settings on the model database. As we know, the model database is used whenever a new database is created. It's effectively copied and used as the foundation for those new databases. And those settings, if they're good or bad, get copied around to all your databases that get created.
Yes. And I'm really sad that we didn't catch this because he was sitting right next to Jonathan Stewart. And we've had both of them on the program before, and they have a little rivalry going up together. And so they were kind of giving each other, a little back and forth there, which was quite fun. So again, I apologize that we couldn't share that. But the next one is Eugene. Eugene, you'll forgive me. I'm probably going to say your last name again. I think it's Meidinger. Meidinger, I think is what you said. And if that's wrong, I apologize. But Eugene mentioned actually on the SSRS, because I didn't want to limit it just to SQL Server. And I just on there because it's just a little too limited at first, which I thought was an interesting idea.
Yep. And then the next one was from Thomas Grohser.
Yes.
If I'm getting his name right. And the comment was he usually makes a bunch of changes because he has a script.
Yes. He couldn't pick just one, right? He's like, there are so many things to change. So he's like, I just run a script. That's my first thing is I run the script and it makes all my changes.
Yep. I love that answer. I think that's a great way to do it.
That's right. So I did think that was an interesting tip. And then our last one, again, that's not SQL Server specific. So Raymond Kim came up and he said, I'm tired of seeing demos with AdventureWorks databases. And he said that another good source is to use some of the baseball stats. And he mentioned a name, which I've forgotten, but there's like a default person out there that kind of keeps up with all these stats. And most of the baseball folks get them from that location. And so if you're, a baseball fan, and you want to be able to show some SQL Server functionality without using AdventureWorks, that was Raymond's suggestion is to go use baseball stats.
Yeah, that sounds like a great excuse to be able to talk about baseball when you're doing your job or doing a presentation.
Yes. And I know that, the popularity of baseball has kind of, gone to and fro with lots of different things, but those who love it. And obviously they're going to take any chance they can to talk more about it.
Okay, so shall we jump into the rest of the conversation?
Yeah, let's do it.
226, which is the first thing I would change from the default. Second thing I would change from the default is to set autogrow all files for user databases. In SQL 2016, the default behavior is that single file growth rather than autogrow all files. Previously, everybody would enable a trace flag for that behavior. That's ignored now. So you have to set a setting that says autogrow all files.
I'm just staying away from the totally obvious ones, so I'll leave it for us to come up with. My name's Mindy Curnutt. One of the things that I recommend all of our customers put on their servers and that I scripted up and give to them is like a complimentary script is an administrative failed login attempt alert system. So it basically goes out and it is querying the error log, the event log, to look for the 18456. What is it? 18? No, it's 18 failed login attempts. Basically, I think it's 18456. Event class, something severity, whatever. I used to know it off the top of my head, but I've gotten too dang administrative. So anyway, and then I have it set where if someone's trying to get in with an account that has administrative level rights, like SA, for example, and someone has tried to get in with that account with the wrong password more than X amount of times and it's configurable within a configurable time window, it will send an email to the administrator so you know someone's trying to guess your admin password and you got their IP address and you immediately know that's happening.
What's a little scary there is I'm constantly surprised at the number of error SQL Server logs that I see where I'm just constantly seeing like failed SA logins, like back to back to back to back to back. And normally it's like some machine that just forgot to change their password, but it's just constantly banging on the server and you're like, that seems a little weird.
Alex Greenberg, I would recommend customers take closer look, dynamically execute string. The problem, what I fixed and forcing C# developers to be more specific, especially with SQL parameter class, that they're using default. And default is nvarchar. In most our databases, we have a varchar, which is trigger convert implicit. Nobody can see it, but it's caused lots of problem in the performance. So number one, I'm forcing developers, if they don't wanna using, it's called SQL DB type, implementing have to be varchar, because by default it's nvarchar. So to avoiding such a problem, better to use store procedure, which is much more manageable, or just keep eye on your ADO code. That's my message for C# developers. Much more manageable. Or just keep eye on your ADO code. That's my message for C# developers. And be specific with data types.
So that's kind of an interesting take, right? It's like setting a policy before you get going.
An interesting part, they saying when I done in-house presentation about it, they saying it's the best practice to specify data type and a class code. I just brought those. I have a code. I wrote code for them. And guys, that's what you're doing, and that have to be. So sometimes we're teaching .NET developers as well.
Sure. Here we go.
My name is Jeremy Fry, and I agree with the whole room that these changes that people are indicating that are best practice to change or break those or reasons why they would change it. Mine is max memory, and the reason why is because I'm a BI guy, and so other tool stack tools need to run on the server, analysis services, SSIS. Although I would like to, in a real world scenario and in a best use case scenario, break those components apart where I'm segregating, if I have a warehouse, my analysis services on its own server, an instance, versus, on the production server where your, transactional information is held and your day-to-day business is occurring. But in a perfect world, that doesn't always happen. So, with that being said, sometimes I see, memory, the way analysis services utilizes memory is it starts to cut things off at about 80% utilization. And so if you have, a high level of things happening on your transactional system that's utilizing a lot of memory, then you start to see, a bottleneck, down the line in other tools as well.
Even it there. So when I install a new instance of SQL Server, and it depends upon the resources that are in the actual operating system for the SQL Server, and of course also what other instances of SQL might be on that server. So there's no tried and true setting that I use to put it at, but I always go in and look at the cost threshold for parallelism and the max degree of parallelism, because the settings that they are currently set at I don't think are realistic for today's hardware. And Microsoft, of course, likes to always be backward compatible. So those values are sort of sitting at levels that are no longer appropriate for either today's hardware or the platform anymore. Now, what you set them at can vary, right? But you need to look at that, I think. Too much parallelism cannot, it's like too much cookies, right?
There you go. That's an analogy I haven't heard before. Cookies to parallelism.
This parallelism, they try to fight with a whole group. They set up to 300. I told them, listen, you are fighting with CX package, but you're just killing parallelism. It's not right for everything. It should be balanced. Right. I can't find formula what the number of CPU and...
It depends on the code.
Yeah, I start with 25 and I go up as far as 100.
Mm-hmm.
They started from 80, go through to 300. I told them, guys, but I'm only one who fighting a whole team, including manager. I'm opposition.
Yeah,
I hardly convince manager to jump over 2014. My manager and I didn't go to 2016 directly because 2014 doesn't do for application. Absolutely. CPU utilization, that's true. Other than that, zero. Just jump. I was like this to be fired because our manager, he doesn't like any opposition. Somehow, I got another back from my Pennsylvania team because my manager in Atlanta. And the Pennsylvania team backed me up. That's why I still employed. He doesn't like any opposition.
You have a non-SQL server?
Kevin Feasel, yet again.
Lies.
Yes, my name is Jonathan Stewart, and I like to turn on lightweight fibers and also priority boost because they will make. Yes. I set the affinity mask. You see, I will buy my CPUs flowers and chocolates, but only certain cores. So I set the affinity to those cores because they like me more.
You also changed max dot randomly too, right?
Yeah, well, of course. Set max dot random number. Yeah, when max dot is prime, you see it goes through the channels that much faster. It's not you don't have to divide it as much. No, I want to shift gears just slightly to integration services or SQL Server data tools. First thing I do after installing data tools, and if I'm doing anything integration services related, I'm installing BIML Express because BIML is the source code for integration services. As far as I'm concerned, integration services packages are the executables. They're the end binary. I don't want to deal with them. I want to actually write real code, and that generates binaries.
My name is Jonathan Stewart, and I support this message.
Oh, yeah, definitely query store then. Change the size. It only keeps 100 megs worth of. Change it up to like 2 gigs or something. And tell it how many days you want to keep because it keeps up to a year. Yeah, and get it off of the primary file group. There's a connect item for that. I tweeted it out this morning. So you can find it and upvote it.
Okay, here's one. How about optimize for ad hoc workloads? I've read that there's never been one negative. I mean, somebody's got to respond, but I've read no one has ever seen anything negative or bad ever happen turning that on. Ever. There you go. One more.
So I do know that Wayne Sheffield experienced once that when he turned it on, he actually saw a CPU spike that he couldn't explain. So he could toggle it, right? He'd turn it back. So he could toggle it, right? He'd turn it back off, right? CPU would, and I can't remember what the spike was. I think it may have been negligible, right? But basically he could flip it and then he'd see CPU differences. Now, I don't know if he eventually attributed that to something else, and it was like dumb luck that somebody was just happened to be doing something else while he was toggling that. But that was the one fluky thing which I need to follow back up with him. But I don't know how he resolved that. But I know that's what at one time he was complaining about.
He had the one application that ran the same query plan only twice for every single thing. The one is really inefficient. If it runs exactly 2 times.
It was a query that checked to see if there were records were there before it actually ran the query. You see, it's like that.
Could be.
You're like, who wrote this? You go to the grocery store to see if they're open, then you go back home and you get your car.
When you need. This is one really esoteric kind of thing. But for SSRS, I would advise there's logs for when stuff gets used, and the default, I forget, I think it's like a month, maybe 2 or 3, but you can set that all the way to like 6 months. And that log's really useful when you need to go back and say, is anyone still using this report? Because usually the answer is no. I mean, I know we've got a bunch of reports that just aren't being used, and at some point we need to go back through. And it's really nice to have 6 months of data that says the only time it was run was when you ran it to see if it was still working. So that's a nice change for SSRS, is just to get that log, because at some point you're going to have to do cleanup because you just get report bloat. It's a problem.
Here you go.
This is Mindy again. So that makes me think of the have a SQL agent job that once a week or something cycles your error log, so you don't end up when something's actually not going well and you want to go in the error log and take a look and your server's been up for a year. Yeah, good luck with that, right? You're like waiting and waiting and waiting, and like 2 hours later the thing might come up, right? It's awful.
Hi, Tracy Boggiano again. Can we make the hackathon noise go away in the error logs, please?
Oh my God, it's like bug out the event error log.
Is that right?
Gigabytes in a day. System mount points getting full, having to delete gigabyte log files, and we only keep 30 days, and we keep...
All of the messages are really scary. Couldn't find this file. Couldn't do a checkpoint. All this horrible stuff, and you ask Microsoft, they're like, oh, yes, don't worry about it. What?
Don't stick it in the log now, right?
Settings, right?
Yeah.
First install SSMS if you like to have the F keys do a certain thing. When you highlight a word and you want to see a, SQL index, or you want to see whatever, right? Don't you go and set up hotkeys so you don't have to sit there and do that? You have a certain way of working.
I'm not smart enough to do that. I don't have the hotkeys set up. I know F5 to execute. That's about it.
I know there was one version of SSMS where they got rid of Control E and I just about died. I couldn't even work because I don't hit F5. I hit Control E like some kind of rogue thing. They put it back. I think because so many people were like,
This is Kevin Feasel. I must confess I've been lying the whole time. The first thing I do is configure Polybase. The second thing I do is install R. The third thing I do is change the log growth.
This is Brian again. While we're doing confessions, I will say that now I am basically a broken person without SQL Prompt.
We got a couple of concurrence over here. Yeah, SQL confessions. Oh boy.
Just consider it the barrier to entry as a DBA. You got to buy SQL Prompt. It's just get it over with, right?
Yeah, I guess I'm interested when they're gonna. Is there a competitor for the SQL Prompt? I know the compare.
I don't use Redgate SQL Prompts.
Oh, who are you using?
I use DevArts SQL Complete.
Oh, DevArts. Okay. Yes, I guess that's true. They are there. I feel like I see a lot more publicity on the other tools, maybe because of compare and all.
But Apex SQL also has a SQL completion tool. I think it's also named SQL Complete.
So I guess actually, as I say this now here today, everybody's names. So you'll apologize. I asked them to introduce themselves. So hopefully they've done that, and then we'll make that information available again on the show notes page as well.
So Carlos, what's the first thing that you do when you configure a SQL Server?
Yeah, that's a great question. And most of the things that were mentioned here today are on my list. We've even haven't had an episode on the SQL Server setup, right? So I'm kind of going through my checklist. But again, I go back to this idea of collecting metrics on the database. I want to know what's going on, and what better way than to start from ground zero. So my first action is to install a database monitor. And luckily now I have a great one in the database health monitor that you've put together to help me along and capture all those metrics.
All right. Well, that kind of leads into what first is I install Database Health Monitor and I run the quick scan report. to see what else needs to be done. And when I do that, that covers a whole lot of the things that were covered in the conversation. But then I also turn on the historic wait stat monitoring. So like you said, we have that baseline there so we can see over time what happens to that SQL server. And that is so valuable when you're trying to diagnose a problem. When somebody says, wow, the server's performing slower today than what it normally does. Well, we can go in and look and figure out, well, what's different? And without those baselines, you don't really know what's different.
No, that's right. We actually had this scenario just this week as we're recording. Client calls us up, asks us to look at a database that we didn't have access to previously. They're having some problems with it, and they're like, "Well, tell us what's wrong." And they're like, "Oh, we see some CPU spike." And we're like, "Well, okay, is that different?" And they're like, "We don't know." And it's like, "Well, okay, then you start to triage, and interestingly enough, there's actually a suggestion for one of our other episodes as to what do you do when you first start checking out a SQL Server. But it's much, much easier once you have that baseline or that history to be able to go back and say, okay, well, here's what I'm looking at in the past. Is it different than that? Or, what's the trend been?
Yep. And I think of that a lot, like if comparing it to if you go to your doctor, and if you go to the same doctor year after year, the doctor gets to know you a little bit and they know what your normal conditions are, whatever they may be.
Right.
But if you go to a new doctor, they may look at everything as, wow, that's different than I've seen before with you, because they haven't seen you.
Sure.
Being able to have that history is incredibly beneficial with the doctor. It's also the same thing when we're doing doctoring on the SQL Server.
Exactly. And so thanks again to the speakers there from SQL Saturday Baltimore. We'll try there from SQL Saturday Baltimore. We do appreciate your time, and we're going to be doing more of these. So as you see us, other SQL Saturdays, we'll try to put those together. And as always, if you have other thoughts or suggestions for the podcast, reach out to us. Let us know what you think we should be talking about.
So one of the great quotes I thought on that session, and I think this came from Mindy, was too much parallelism is like too much cookies. And I think, okay, yum, too much cookies could be a problem, but too much parallelism indeed could be just as bad.
Yes, well, I can attest to the too much cookies problem. I am your scenario there, your evidence for that one. Okay, so again, the show notes for today's episode will be available at SQLDataPartners.com/first-thing. So that's going to be 2 T's there, first and then thing.
Or at SQLDataPartners.com.
Twitter, I am at Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am at SQL EMT. And we'll see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.